Hello learners, welcome to this program. The title of the program is Learning Design, Concept and Benefits. I am Sutapa Bose. I teach at the School of Education, Indira Gandhi National Open University. During this program, we shall discuss certain aspects about learning design. First of all, what is a learning design? In order to understand what a learning design is, we need to compare it and contrast it with instructional design. Most of us are familiar with the term instructional design. Therefore, we are going to begin the discussions with the idea of instructional design. What is it? Why it is done? We are going to deliberate briefly on the process of instructional designing, but this will help you to understand its difference with learning design and how learning design is different from an instructional design. After focusing on the difference of these two terms, instructional design and learning design, I shall provide a few examples of both of these. The examples will further clarify the difference between an instructional design and a learning design. With this, let us begin the deliberations. Coming to the question of what is an instructional design, most of you who have an academic background in the discipline of education or teacher education are likely to be familiar with this term instructional design. Nevertheless, I shall help you in recapitulating, recalling what is already known to you. Instructional designing is planning for teaching. It makes teaching a planned activity. And this is primarily the difference between an instructional design and teaching. Teaching could be informal. Teaching could be unplanned. Teaching could be instantaneous. For example, when we learn certain activities like cooking, stitching, cleaning from our family members at home, we learn how to use a technology like downloading an app, maybe from our family members or from our friends. We learn many things from our peers. Well, neither our family members, nor our friends, nor our peers come with a plan for teaching us how to do these things. We demand knowledge about these things and instantaneously they help us to learn. There is neither a plan for teaching nor is there a predetermined goal for teaching. How do they teach? They teach informally, of course in an unplanned way, on the basis of what they know. They try to help us to learn. This is teaching. Teaching remains teaching when we plan it. Nevertheless, the teaching becomes a planned activity. And planned teaching carried out in order to attain goals, predetermined goals rather, are instructions. What is designing? Designing is planning in order to attain certain goals. For example, a building is designed to be a hospital. This building is not going to serve as an airport building or as a school. And at the same time, a school building would not be designed as a hospital. A playground, which is used for playing football, would be designed in a particular way, whereas the ground used for playing a different game, like badminton or cricket, would be designed in a different way. Therefore, we begin with the goals. We begin with goals and We plan how to attain goals. This is designing. Designing is required for imparting instructions, and today our topic is about learning design. We also can design learning. But coming back to instructional designing, we design instructions. In other words, in simpler words, we design what to teach. How is it decided? It is decided vis-a-vis the goals that have been set earlier. We also decide when to teach what. A concept may comprise several topics, subtopics. Which one do you teach first? Which one do you teach next? What is the sequence? How do you sequence these topics and subtopics? There is a logic in it. And this answers the question of when to teach what. This also has to match with the goals that we have set. Goals can be loosely used as objectives. Nevertheless, these are two different terms. Goal is much wider. Objectives are specific. We shall not get into that right now. Depending on the objectives, which objective has to be attained first, which objective has to be attained later, we sequence the topics to be taught, and this answers when to teach what. After that, the next question is how to teach. How do we teach? We can answer this question in terms of learning experiences. Learning experiences need to be selected. Sometimes inputs are procured, like resources you can procure if it is freely available, free for use. And there is also an option of creating resources. For example, if you are teaching through the distance mode, you may develop print-based content, you may develop a video like this, you may develop an audio program or a multimedia program. The print medium, the video, the audio, the multimedia, all these media are used for delivering the learning experiences. Therefore, we have an answer for how to teach. There are also other aspects which we need to consider while answering this question. What are these? For explaining the content, how do I explain it so that the explanation is simple? It is effective. What is effective? Effective means my learners learn what I teach. Learning experiences therefore need to be selected with an eye on the instructional objectives. And what sort of examples should I use? What sort of metaphors should I use? How to simplify the content? How to present it in a way that learners understand it? For example, a teacher has set an instructional objective of teaching about cells. Cells of plants, cells of animals. She thinks often of a metaphor like a brick, and she tells her students, well, a cell is like a building block, maybe a brick. She has thought of this in advance. Why? So that the instructional objective that she has set is attained. Therefore, we have answers to what to teach, why to teach, and how to teach. Finally, we ascertain whether teaching has been effective, whether the inputs selected, the inputs provided have been effective. How do we do that? For that, we have an assessment exercise. Maybe one, maybe more. It could be in the form of a quiz. It could be in the form of activities. It could be in the form of a set of questions. Learners, after learning, they take this test, or maybe they carry out the activities that you have designed. On the basis of the outcomes demonstrated by learners, we decide whether instructional objectives have been attained. Therefore, beginning with the articulation, specification of instructional objectives, selection of learning experiences, selection or maybe development of suitable learning experiences, delivering it using an appropriate medium or a combination of media or media used separately like multimedia or multiple media. Multimedia of course means when content in different media has been put together, has been integrated, whereas multiple media, we deliver content using different media independent of each other. And finally, there is assessment. This is instructional designing. We can sum it up by saying that instructional designing is designing teaching. It keeps teaching focused. It keeps the teacher on track. The teacher knows what to teach and she proceeds accordingly. This is instructional designing. We design instructions and thereby teaching. However, learning design is quite different. Why? Because we design learning. In order to explain it, I shall cite an example of instructional designing. As I said, we begin with the goal. What is the goal? In this case, it is to develop the ability to explain the process of evaporation. Following the instructions, I expect my learners that they would be able to explain what evaporation is. And what are the inputs I provide? Learning experiences. Well, I have text-based resources and I also arrange a demonstration to demonstrate to my learners what evaporation is. After that, I assess their learning and I try to determine whether my learners are in a position to explain the process of evaporation. I provide feedback. If they have indeed learned, there is a feedback for it. If I feel that they haven't learned well, there is something lacking, I would alter the inputs, or maybe I would provide the inputs once again and assess learning again. So this is an example of instructional designing. In view of the goals, I decide what to teach, how to teach it, and of course, why to teach. That comes at the outset. Instructional designs therefore focus on instructions, whereas learning design is for learning. Instructional designing is also for learning. Why do we teach? The simple answer is so that our learners learn. Nevertheless, even though we teach in order to facilitate learning, instructional designing is definitely for learning, but the focus remains on instructions. What should be the objectives of teaching? What inputs should I as a teacher provide? What would be the content that I should select and deliver in order to facilitate learning? What should be the illustration that I need to use in order to explain the content better? Which technologies should I use? How would I assess learning? And what would indicate the attainment of instructional objectives. Each and every step the teacher decides, the teacher plans, so that teaching is effective. I repeat, the focus is on teaching, and learning outcomes are indeed important. Instructional objectives are sometimes stated, sometimes it is clarified in the form of learning outcomes. In a learning design, however, since the emphasis is on learning rather than instructional objectives, we focus on learning outcomes. For an instructional design, if the objective is students would be able to list the benefits of using an instructional design, when I think of a learning design, the same instructional objective would be stated in the form of a learning outcome. Following learning, the learners would be able to list the benefits of instructional design. You see that the objective remains the same, but after having taught instructional designing, my satisfaction would have been, or a teacher's satisfaction would have been, well, I have taught well. But when she designs learning, she would be satisfied only when the learning outcomes which she has stated at the beginning are demonstrated by learners. This could be that my learners are able to apply instructional designing in their teaching. When they teach, they are able to develop instructional design and apply it. This is a learning outcome I am ultimately looking for. Listing the benefits of using an ID, instructional designing, that is an objective, but what is the outcome that I seek? The outcome that I seek is that learners should be able to develop an instructional design and they should be able to use it. Therefore, this sort of learning outcome would subsume the benefits of using an instructional design. Until and unless people are convinced about the benefits of an instructional designing, we can assume that they would not be using it effectively. Hence, when we develop learning outcomes, instead of stating objectives like this, that they would be able to explain the concept of instructional design, they would be able to list the benefits, these objectives would remain, but these would be subsumed by a learning outcome, like they would be able to develop an instructional design, number one. Number two, they would be able to use it while teaching. So these are learning outcomes. What are the inputs to be given? This is decided not only by the teacher, but the learners may also have a role in it. For example, the content, the illustration, the graphics, graphs, whatever we use, the technology to be used, sometimes we may leave it open to the learners. We may suggest a few, and if I say that, well, I am going to use this technology for delivering the content, maybe print, the learners may say that there is a good video, or I have watched a good video, or there is a good television program, and that could also be suitably integrated into the learning design. When you tell your learners that, look, these are the graphics, these are the pictures or images, they might also suggest a few. In a learning design, we take into consideration the learner's agency in learning. This means that learners do have some experiences. They do not come to us with an empty mind. They have experiences, they have some understanding which can be used for learning further, learning other concepts. How do we assess learning in this case? In this case, unlike in an instructional designing, formative assessment is a better way to assess. While learners are carrying out, for example, activities, or maybe they are reading something, the teacher could interact with them in order to diagnose the problems, the gaps in learning, and bridge the learning gaps. Therefore, learning design lends itself more to formative assessment. And what will indicate learning? Continuous improvement, acquisition of ability to learn further. That would indicate learning, not just what I have taught. If they are able to answer using rote memorization, that would not be considered to be learning. Learners, as I said, learners' agency is taken into consideration, and when I plan learning instead of teaching, I have to focus on the learner more than on myself as a teacher. As I have already said, that learning design, the focus is on learning. Learning is planned instead of planning teaching. And I have also said that we need to keep in mind, we need to recognize the learner's agency in learning, that the learner has an active role. She should play an active role instead of being a passive listener to what the teacher says, for what the teacher says. Instead of teachers carrying out activities, the learners should engage in activities. And there could be discussions, teamwork, activities, all these things would be the elements that would find place in a learning design. What are the elements of a learning design? A learning design provides a framework comprising elements like learning tasks, for example, carrying out discussions on how to protect child rights in schools, develop a report with incidents of child right violation, how to prevent it. These discussions carried out by learners with their peers are learning tasks. When they read something, relevant text, resources pertaining to child rights, maybe a concerned unit or a chapter or some other documents, that is also a learning task. When they watch a video, that is also a learning task. The bottom line is that the learners need to be active. So what is the teacher's role? The teacher doesn't sit back. She supports learning. She interacts with learners. Maybe learners are working as a team. She interacts with the teams on a continuous basis and scaffolds learning whenever she detects learning gap. And this makes assessment formative. Therefore, I had said that formative assessment lends itself more to learning design. The resources are important in learning design too, just like in instructional design. But it is not that the teacher alone selects resources and uses it. She could select resources, she could ask learners to select resources, and the resources could be in the form of text, audio, video, for example on management of schools, and the learners could read it. And while they read, the teacher has to interact in order to find out whether they understand what they read. Therefore, the teacher facilitates learning, helps learners access resources, initiates discussions. Sometimes she anchors and moderates the discussions, summarizes the discussions, and she has a rapport with the learners. And the criteria for assessing learning would be determined earlier, would be predetermined, and assessing learning and providing feedback and support in the form of additional explanations, guidance for further readings. These things are provided continuously by the teacher on the basis of learning gaps. This makes assessment formative. With this, I would say that learning design focuses on learning, unlike instructional designs that focus more on teaching. Thank you.